Hello, everybody. What's up? It's Miss Thompson here. We're going to talk about Chapter 5, which is the evolution of biodiversity. Okay. And I know I say this about literally every chapter, but this is one of my favorite chapters. Okay. So, first, let's talk about this. All right. This is a little bit of review for you from biology, ninth grade, but just take a second to think about what biodiversity means because that's a term we're going to use a lot. All right. So, basically, you all know this, but it essentially means the variety of life, right? So let's talk about that variety of life, okay? We talked a little bit about this in the first chapter, okay, with the different levels of diversity, but essentially we have these divided into three different levels, okay? Three different scales, you could say. Let me move this so that I'm not in the way. Okay, so the first one is ecosystem diversity. Okay, so within a given region, for example, the variety of ecosystems is a measure of ecosystem diversity. Okay, so this is kind of like the largest type of diversity or the largest level. All right, the second largest one is going to be species diversity. Okay, within a given ecosystem, there's a variety of different species, right? There are all sorts of mammals and insects and everything like that within each ecosystem, right? So that's kind of the middle ground there. The smallest type is genetic diversity. Okay, so within each species, there's genetic diversity. All right, that's just the variety of genes within a given species. Okay, so these three levels here contribute to the overall biodiversity of the planet. All right, so as we'll see later on when we learn about other things, the diversity of genes, species, and ecosystems, they all play a major role in the normal functioning of ecosystems, natural systems, and also ecosystem services that humans need to depend on. Okay, so how do we measure biodiversity? All right, we've talked about what the definition of a species is before, but if you don't remember, essentially a species is defined as a group of organisms that is distinct from other such groups in terms of size, shape, behavior, biochemical properties, and also that species can interbreed with other individuals in the group to produce viable offspring. Okay, that last requirement is important because sometimes individuals from different species can mate, but they cannot produce offspring that will survive. Okay, so that's what we mean when we say viable. So we're going to work on an activity this week, Friday probably, where we'll go outside and do a population sampling activity. So scientists have estimated that there are approximately 10 million species on Earth, and you might be wondering, well, how the heck would they know that? We're going to do a little thing outside with a bunch of beans that will help you to see how that works, and you might find it to be a little frustrating, so it's a really fun day for me. But anywho, we'll talk more about that later. Oops. Okay, so let's talk about describing biodiversity. All right, there are two diagrams here. Let's talk about these. So we know that all, or not all of the species that we have on this planet are uniformly distributed, okay? So the number of species on Earth is not a useful indicator of local or regional species diversity, all right? Environmental scientists have two different measures, they're listed right here, that they use, I can't get this to go away, that they use to measure species diversity, okay? We call those species richness, and the other term that you guys need to know is species evenness, okay? So the number of species in a given area, such as, I don't know, the canopy of a tree or something like that, is called species richness. Species richness is used to give an approximate sense of biodiversity in a particular place, okay? But scientists also want to know the relative proportions of individuals within different species. Okay, so we have this other term called species evenness. How does this go away? I can't figure it out. All right, but anyway, species evenness is a little bit different. This tells us whether a particular ecosystem is numerically dominated by one species or whether all of its species have similar abundance. Okay, so an ecosystem has high species evenness if its species are all represented by similar numbers of individuals. All right, an ecosystem has low species evenness if one species is represented by many individuals while others are represented by only a few individuals. Okay, in the latter case right there, when there's only a few individuals, there's less diversity. Okay, so if you look at this example right here, this is an example of two forests. Okay, consider we have these two communities, right? Community 1 and Community 2. Both of these forests contain 20 trees, okay, that are distributed amongst 4 species. You can see A, B, C, and D. Okay, so if you look at Community 1 here, each species is represented by 5 individuals. All right, we've got 5 of species A, 5 of species B. You can count them there. C, there's 5, and then D, there's 5 right there. Okay, so if you look at it, it's 25% species A, 25% species B, 25% species C, and then also 25% species D. Okay, in community 2, there are still 5 different species, but one species has 14 trees. Okay, so if you look at A, there's a whole bunch more of this one. All right, 14 individuals. The other ones have only, let's see, 2 of each. Okay, so B only has 2 here, C has 1, 2, and then D has 2 as well. So if you look at the percentages here, this is numerically dominated by species A. Okay, it's mostly species A, and only 10% are B, C, and D each. Okay, so you would say that community 1 here has greater species evenness, and it's therefore considered to be more diverse. So having high species evenness is good for a lot of different reasons that we'll talk about when we talk about how humans are impacting biodiversity. But if you have more species and a higher evenness, that's going to make it a more resistant ecosystem. Okay, versus here, if this number of species A were all the way up to, say, 95% or so, and everything else was really low, the chances of those 3 other species, B, C, and D, going extinct or something like that when there's some sort of natural disaster or human disturbance are a lot higher. Okay, so we'll talk about that a lot more when we get to our food and agriculture unit when we talk about farms and stuff, because we've essentially taken areas all over the United States that were diverse, like prairies, and removed all of those native plants and replaced them with monoculture crops like corn or beans. Okay, so there's very little diversity and species evenness there. It's mostly corn, it's mostly beans, and so that's basically setting the ecosystem up for bad things if some sort of disease comes in. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about this in class. All right, here's just a funny picture I found. I don't know, I thought it was cute. This kid's going places. Not college, but places. Ha ha! He's got the ox thing in his ear. Oh, it's funny. Funny. Okay. Let's talk about this. Evolution. You guys have seen these before, probably not since biology, but this is what we call a phylogenetic tree or a cladogram. Okay? All right, this is how we determine evolutionary relationships among species, right? Scientists are able to take species and organize them into categories based on how closely related they are to each other. Okay, so we call that phylogeny, the branching patterns of evolutionary relationships. It's right over here. We can describe phylogeny with a diagram like this one here. Okay, so the relatedness of species in a phylogeny is determined by the similarity of their traits. Okay, the more similar the traits of 2 species, the more closely related those 2 species are to each other. Okay. Historically, scientists use mostly morphological traits, which mean how species look, things like bone measurements and stuff like that. But today, it's based on a bunch of different things. So morphology, behavior of said species, and also we use a lot more genetic testing and stuff like that. So you need to be familiar with the term phylogenetic tree. We'll talk about this a lot more when we go over evolution in class, but keep this in your brain. Oh boy, I got a joke for y'all. Joke time. So what do you call a frozen dog? Cody, what do you think? What do you call a frozen dog? A popsicle. Oh my God. Speaking of puppies, come here, puppy. I got a little popsicle right here. Oh my God. Kiba, say hello. This is my little popsicle. Kiba. Ew. Can you say hello, apes? He doesn't care at all. Look at him. Say hello. Hello, apes. Ugh. Ew. He has a licking problem. He can't hold his liquor. Okay, guys, so let's talk about evolution and how we have all this amazing biodiversity that we have today. Okay, so our biodiversity, the plethora of species and things that we have on this planet is a product of evolution, all right? Which, if you want to define it, is defined as a change in the genetic composition of a population over time. So just think of it that way, change over time. It's as simple as that. Evolution can occur at multiple different levels, okay? So evolution below the species level, like the evolution of different varieties of apples or potatoes or something like that, is what we call microevolution, Okay, so you guys should be familiar with these two terms. In contrast, when we have genetic changes, giving rise to new species or new genera, families, classes, phyla, stuff like that, kind of like on a larger scale, we call that macroevolution. All right, so if you guys are in microeconomics or macroeconomics, right, it essentially just means small scale for micro and large scale for macro. Okay, it's the same kind of concept. In order to have evolution happen, we have to have genetic diversity. Okay, so there's a bunch of terms you guys need to be familiar with, like genes, genotypes, phenotypes. All of these things are in your book. Make sure you go through, and when you do the reading guide, that you review these terms. Okay, I'm not going to spend time going through them. But another thing you guys should also be familiar with is that two processes that create genetic diversity, those two processes are mutation and recombination. Okay, so this is something you learned about when you took biology as a freshman. It's also stuff that's in your book. I recommend going through and studying up on those so that it will help you with the next part here. Okay, so let's talk about a couple other things. All right, there's three primary ways that evolution occurs. Okay, and those three things are artificial selection, all right, which you have right here. You've also got natural selection, and the third type is random processes. So there's a few different types of random processes that we'll talk about. Okay, so let's look at these three different mechanisms of evolution. Okay, this is artificial selection right here. Okay, humans have influenced evolution for a long time by breeding plants, breeding animals, and stuff like that for different traits that we desire. Okay, so for example, I know the picture here is of plants, but a good example would be domesticated dogs, right? Domesticated dogs originally belong to the same species of gray wolf, okay? Yet we have all sorts of dogs in different sizes and shapes and stuff like that. They range from a Chihuahua all the way up to a Great Dane, okay? But dogs are all still a single species, and they could all mate with one another and produce viable offspring. So when we have certain traits that we want from a certain species, we can process evolution by using artificial selection. Okay, we've used this process, artificial selection, to produce numerous breeds of horses, cattle, sheep, pigs, stuff like that, chickens, with all of these traits that humans find useful or just aesthetically pleasing, right? Think about my dog, for example. He's sleeping by my feet right here. My dog would never evolve in the wild, okay, because he's literally worthless. He's just cute and fluffy. Or if you think about an English bulldog, which I love, by the way. If anybody has an English bulldog, let me know. But they can barely breathe. They have to get C-sections when they have babies. Like, what? We've only bred them because we want them, right? Another good example of artificial selection is a lot of our modern agricultural crops. Oh my God, that's hard to say. Modern agricultural crops. All right. But I remember when I first learned this, I was so obsessed and surprised. But anyway, all of these plants right here, all of these vegetables come from wild mustards. So maybe you didn't know, but you've got Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, kale, and kohlrabi. They all have been artificially selected from different traits of the wild mustard plant. So depending on what we want, we could artificially select like the leaves for the kale, or it's been years since I took plant systematics, but you get the picture, right? The root for kohlrabi, okay? Stuff like that. We've been able to make these different plants. So every time you eat these things, you're really eating wild mustard. Okay, pretty cool. Even though artificial selection has been super useful to us, it can also produce a number of unintended results. Okay, so you have to think about that. But one example is farmers who use herbicides to kill weeds. Okay, we cover large areas with herbicides in order to kill certain plants. They want to kill the weeds and they want to keep the crop, right? But there's an increasing chance that at least one will possess a mutation that allows it to survive the herbicide application. Okay, so if that one mutant plant passes on its herbicide resistance to the offspring, then we would have artificially selected for an herbicide resistance in that plant. Roundup is a popular herbicide, and it's basically led to the evolution of several species of Roundup resistant weeds. So if you have these weeds that are resistant to Roundup and they're not going to die, that causes a lot of problems. Okay, this also happens with antibiotics. Maybe you guys have heard that you shouldn't use hand sanitizer all the time because it kills 99.9% of bacteria or something. That 0.1% resistant bacteria that isn't being killed by the hand sanitizer could become harmful. Okay. So that being said, artificial selection can, impact humans in positive ways or negative unintended ways. All right, let's talk about the next thing. Okay, natural selection. Here we go. So this process of natural selection, which you guys have heard about a lot before, is similar to the process of evolution by artificial selection, but it has one key difference. Oh my God, I can't talk. In evolution by natural selection, the environment is what determines which individuals survive and reproduce. Okay, so simply put, members of a population naturally vary in their traits. Certain combination of those traits make individuals better able to survive and reproduce, okay, depending on the situation that they're living in. So as a result, the genes that produce those traits are more common in the next generation. So before the 19th century, the idea that species could have evolved over time had been suggested by a bunch of different scientists and philosophers. But the concept of evolution by natural selection didn't really become a theory until we had two scientists, which I'm sure you've heard of before, Alfred Wallace and Charles Darwin, independently put the various pieces together. Okay, so you guys should be familiar with Charles Darwin's story, but I'm not going to go through every single bit. It's in the book. Y'all can read. So here's your riddle for this video. All right, let's see if y'all can get it, and I will tell you the answer in class. If you have me, you want to share me. If you share me, you haven't got me. What am I? What do you think it is, Mr. Morales? If you have me, you want to share me. If you share me, you haven't got me. What am I? He doesn't know. He'll figure it out later. And so will you. So I hope you all have a fabulous day, and I will see you in class. Bye-bye.